Hi, my name is Michael Burris, and I'm the CEO of the South Carolina Policy Council. Thank you so much for tuning in to our 2026 candidate interview series. I would like to thank our donors and my staff for their contributions in making all of this possible. What you are going to see are candidates from both parties running for statewide office in the 2026 cycle share their platforms with you, our viewers. Our interviews will be based off of the South Carolina Policy Council's core values of limited government, free markets, and individual liberty. We appreciate you watching, and we hope you enjoy. Hello, I'm Michael Burris, the CEO of the South Carolina Policy Council. Thank you for tuning in to our 2026 Gubernatorial interview series. I'm joined here with our Research Director, Sam Aaron, and the South Carolina Attorney General, Alan Wilson, who's also a Republican candidate for governor. Thank you for joining us, Alan.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So we're going to ask some questions based on what we do here at the Policy Council as it relates to your candidacy for governor. And we're going to start off with, why are you running for governor?
First off, I love the state of South Carolina. I love its people, and I've loved serving for the last 14 plus years as the Attorney General for the great state of South Carolina. In addition to serving as Attorney General, I'm a 29-year veteran of the National Guard. I've served in combat, led soldiers in combat, and so service is something that's been baked into my DNA. My three brothers and I were all Eagle Scouts. We've been active in our communities and clubs like, the Rotary Club. So public service is something that is very baked into my psyche. As a career prosecutor and someone who has really loved serving, I've had an awesome time the last 14 years serving as Attorney General. But as Attorney General, you are a very unique tool set to deal with problems. The Attorney General can sue and the Attorney General can indict. The Attorney General doesn't have as much imprint on the policies of the state. So when I go in and I would see fraud, waste, and abuse in a government agency, if it didn't rise to a criminal level, obviously, if it didn't violate a law, I couldn't sue my way out of the problem, and I certainly could not indict my way out of the problem. But the governor has got a broader, bully pulpit to deal with issues in South Carolina. And so there's been 16 years since there's been an open governor's race, and I feel like serving as a statewide elected official with awesome responsibilities and powers as the Attorney General, I'm uniquely qualified, having observed a lot of the inefficiencies in government, to deal with those and address those with the bully pulpit of the governor's office. So my love of this state, my love of the people in the state, my love of public service, my decades of public service have prepared me to be the next governor of South Carolina. And that's why I'm running, because I feel like I'm uniquely qualified to get South Carolina from good to great and to be a transitional figure, and not just a transitional figure, but a transformational governor. And that's what I aspire to be as the people's governor.
Thank you very much, Sam. Turn it over to you.
Yeah, so we're going to get into the kind of meat and potatoes here with taxes and spending. So the first question we've got is relating to spending in general. Over the past 25 years, South Carolina, when it comes to our general fund, which is, tax revenue primarily, it's increased every year except for 1 year because of COVID over these past 25 years. What would your administration do about this spending? Would you, kind of look at that growth and try and restrict it in some capacity? How would you look at that issue?
Well, first, I want people to understand that government doesn't create revenue. Government doesn't have any money. All government can do is set the conditions for people in the private sector to be profitable. And from those profits comes the revenue that the government collects. So I believe that the government should do everything in its power to get out of the way of people working in the private sector. You obviously need rules and regulations. You need to create predictability for industries that are regulated by government, and policies that are imposed by government need to be not just predictable, but they need to be fair and not arbitrarily and indiscriminately applied. With that being said, there's a couple of ideas that I have. If you look at the United States and you look at the southeastern quadrant of the United States, you look at states like Texas, Tennessee, and Florida. They are all at 0% income tax. You look at Oklahoma and Mississippi, Indiana, West Virginia, Kentucky. All of them have passed laws to go to 0% income tax. I know that Louisiana, among other states in the southeastern sector, are working and trying to pass laws, including Arkansas, are passing laws to go to 0% income tax. South Carolina's neighbor to the north, Georgia, is in 2 years will be at 3.99%, and Georgia will be at 4.99% rather, and North Carolina will be at 3.99%. South Carolina is currently at 6%. The closest state in the Southeast is the state of Alabama at a flat tax of 5%. That is the closest state to us. You have to go as far north as New Jersey to find a state with a higher income tax, and you have to go as far west as Oregon or Washington State to find a state with a higher income tax in South Carolina. And you have to fly over Illinois to get there. Illinois' income tax is lower than South Carolina. So I don't believe a income tax by itself is a silver bullet, but I think it is a major signal that we can send, with the Southeast being the fastest growing region in the United States of America. We're just not regionally competing. We're not just nationally competing. We are globally competing. We're in a global competition, and it starts right here in the Southeast of the US. So I believe that South Carolina needs to take its 6% down to 0% income tax. That's the first thing that I want to focus on as governor on an economic package. Now, how do you do that? So I've looked at the numbers over a 10-year period. I believe from I think 2015 to 2024, over that 10-year period, South Carolina state government spending grew at 6.5%, while the population of South Carolina indexed with inflation grew at 3.4%. What that means is we were spending 3.1% faster as a state than we were growing as a state population. Had we indexed or basically capped state government spending on average every year to the level of population plus inflation growth, over a 10-year period, that would have been $19.7 billion in tax cuts. So what I believe we can do as a state, I believe that we should do what other states are doing and create revenue triggers where we're not going to spend more than we're growing. Basically, we keep it capped and we return all of that revenue, all those taxes back to the people in the form of permanent tax cuts. So what you're doing is, and again, like 40-something% of the state revenue comes from the income tax. You just can't get rid of that in one day and the next day shift it to other taxable forms of revenue. You want to do it gradually. And so you do the caps, and it's like every year, whatever your population growth is, you cap spending there, you return that money to the people, and over a period of 6, 8, 10, 12 years, 15, depending on how aggressive you want to be, you can land that tax down to zero, that income tax down to zero. Now, what's happening is that people are being allowed to keep their money. They're not going out and putting it in a jar and burying it in the backyard. They're investing their money. They're spending their money. That money, the money that you allow them to keep, is going back into our economy, and it's growing our economy. So if you look at this table as a pizza, if this is the income tax right here, if we get rid of the income tax, okay, that you may be closing up the pie wedge, but you're growing the size of the pizza as far as revenue. All of that money is going to be taxed in other places. People consume, they spend, they invest. So you grow the economy. You're also doing something else. You're incentivizing capital investments in our state from outside of the state, outside of the region. People are wanting to move here. A couple years ago, a friend of mine came and picked me up at a hotel in Phoenix, Arizona, and he was thinking about moving his business, his company. He was looking at other states, and we talked about coming to South Carolina. And as we were walking around, I remember saying, "Why don't you come to South Carolina?" He said, "What's your income tax?" I believe at the time it was 6.5%. And he says, "Sorry, man, I mean, 0%, I can't leave a 0% state. I'm looking at Florida." That person I was talking to at the time was Charlie Kirk. And so I'm constantly reminded of that conversation I had with Charlie about moving his business here. And think of the tens of thousands of Charlie Kirks, people who are trying to make a business decision to move somewhere, and they're looking at this state. Now, the income tax can't be the only thing. We have to look at our property tax. I mean, Act 388, which basically put owner-occupied homes in first class, but it put rental properties and commercial properties in steerage. And there was an unintended consequence of that. For instance, I talked to a guy who has an 8,000 square foot house, and he was telling me he has a bunch of rental properties that are anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 square feet, and he has tenants in those. He said, "Alan, the property taxes on my rental properties are 3 times higher on a 1,500 square foot home than it is on my 8,000 square foot home, because that is a second owned property." He says, "Who do you think's paying that property tax? That lower middle income person and that family." And so those property taxes are getting passed to the people who need relief the most. And so we need to and also it's encouraging people not to invest in commercial properties. And obviously, commercial properties are ones that are owned by businesses that are creating revenue for the state. So we need to reevaluate how we look at property taxes. So those are some of the economic ideas I have. And there's others, but those are some of the ideas I have about making South Carolina a more attractive state for people to move into.
So good news on that front. So the Policy Council, one of our big wins last year in the House bill, the income tax House bill, was getting an amendment passed for surplus triggers. Sorry. So what is $250 million in surplus revenue within the income tax automatically drops down the rate. So obviously that's over in the Senate right now, but we crafted something called the Responsible South Carolina Budget, which effectively is a three-legged stool. So it's surplus triggers, getting down to a flat rate to start that decline down to zero, which I agree with you because Kansas, as you know, what was it, 10, 12 years ago, just dropped it to zero and they didn't stop their spending.
That's right. And the people who are against zero income tax, they use that as an example of why not to do it. But what they're not telling people is they didn't do anything about their spending.
Right, exactly. And so population plus inflation, spending caps, what we've been championing for decades, I guess, in this institution. So you have to do all three. And if you don't do all three, you find yourself in a Kansas situation, right, where all of a sudden you don't have revenue to pay your bills and you politically find yourself in a tough spot. So,
hey, look, I was told that Elon Musk wanted to move Tesla here and headquartered here. And well, excuse me, let me back up. Tesla, the corporation, wanted to, and the board voted to come here to South Carolina, but that got vetoed by Elon, and now they're in Texas because of one of the reasons. So can you imagine? I mean, that's just one example of a company saying, "I love the state, but I just don't like the income tax."
Right. I think too, you're hitting the nail on the head that, tax reform is a byproduct of addressing the spending issue. And nobody would go about their, monthly budget in this manner where they spend however much they have, right? They would make the budget and then the budget is based off of this, right? The budget is there before. So, I mean, as the governor's office plays a very strong role in this and crafting this initial budget, right? What I've seen over the past several years watching the budget process is the governor's budget is the smallest. It grows in the House, it grows in the Senate, it grows in the House again, and the final result is a lot bigger than the governor's initial budget. So if elected, how would you utilize that line item veto and get it to more closely align with that initial budget?
Look, I would use the line item veto as that cap we talked about until we passed it statutorily. I would give the General Assembly predictability. I'm like, guys, if you want to know what my veto is going to look like, look at population plus inflation or whatever metric we can use that is similar to that. I'm open to finding a different formula, but I think predictability is important. Say, listen, I'm happy to fund. Look, the three most expensive things we do as a state is we educate, we incarcerate, and we medicate, right? Those are things that we have to make sure that we are adequately funding, but we are hemorrhaging money in those three lines of government sector spending because of the inefficiencies baked into government, which is why I want to doge. I'm using that term loosely, but doge the inefficiencies out of government. But I want to make sure that the money is going to its intended purpose and that we are creating an incentive structure with the General Assembly to comply with my agenda, which is to keep spending down so that we can grow the economy and put money where it belongs on those essential services that families living in the margins rely on, as well as allowing families to keep money so they can climb the quintiles of economic prosperity in our state. And that's what I want for our families in South Carolina.
Yeah, and kind of building off of that, whenever we were crafting the questions for this interview here, we looked at our supporters and we asked them kind of what are some of the things that they were curious about. So this question comes from Alex in Greenville. South Carolina has a state law requiring state agencies to follow zero-based budgeting principles annually when submitting their budget. As governor, would you immediately enforce this law? And just to kind of add some context, I know for a fact that when looking through these requests that the agencies submit to the executive budget office, a lot of times they're just justifying new expenses and increases and not all of it entirely. So you kind of lack that, that look back of, hey, is this spending worthwhile? Is this program efficient? Are we using the taxpayers' money in a good manner? So how would you address that?
So I would be very supportive of doing that. I do want to, this may be another question you all might ask, and I may be jumping ahead, but I talked about doging South Carolina, and I think every candidate and everyone's talking about SC Doge or doging the state. I've been talking about this for years, and I alluded to this in my first, while I was running for governor. You see all kinds of government fraud, waste, and abuse. You see inefficiencies baked into government, and it doesn't rise to a criminal level. It's just bad government actors implementing bad government policies, and there are gaps, and we have outdated, outmoded, antiquated systems for catching that. I would like to see us use advanced AI platforms for addressing how money is being spent at school districts, at city and municipal government levels, at county government levels, and across all state agencies, identifying where that money is going and not just the money, but the policies being implemented. And then basically the way I would do that is take the Office of the Inspector General and basically beef it up. Because here's the thing, right now, the Office of the Inspector General, it's like a reactive like there's some allegation that there's fraud, waste, and abuse in some school district or some state agency, and they go and they look at it, and then they come back and they do their report and it gets published online, and then they wait for the next complaint to come in. And I know it's not that simple. They're always coming in. But what if the Office of the Inspector General, when it came to when it dealt with efficiencies in government, like this question begs, how money is being spent, how policies are being implemented. What if the IG's office had the resources and the bandwidth to do random audits on every agency that receives any state appropriate, regardless of whether it's a school level or whether it's at a local level or state level? Think about how the highway patrol and local law enforcement patrol, how they patrol for crime. Do they sit in the police department waiting for someone to call in a drunk driver? Or are they patrolling the highways and interstates of South Carolina, randomly looking for that stuff, acting both as someone to catch that bad conduct, but also to deter it? Right now, the IG's office is almost reactionary. I think the IG's office needs to be doing randomized audits of all agencies. Now, you're probably thinking, do you need 5,000 investigators to do that? You would need to beef up the investigators, the forensic accountants, the auditors, but I do believe you can use advanced AI technology and platforms to be a force multiplier, turning one investigator into 50 investigators, doing 5,000 man hours a week instead of 50 man hours a week. So I would like to see South Carolina doge itself, both on how we spend money at all levels of government, as well as acting as a deterrent to fraud, waste, and abuse. Right now, there are government actors at all levels who are spending money like a drunken sailor in a brothel. And they're doing that because they don't believe anyone is going to come after them. And I've been in the National Guard for almost 30 years, and I know they have randomized drug tests where randomly 10% of your unit will be called to go do a test to determine if you were taking an illicit drug. And it acts as a deterrent because no one knows if their number is going to be called. But if agencies were spending money and implementing policies with the belief that at any given moment, people could come in and ask them to open the books and then report that to the public, I think they might be a little bit more responsible. And the ones who are irresponsible would be forced out of government. If we do this, what I would advocate for is anything that rises to a criminal level gets referred to law enforcement and the AG's office or local prosecution agency for prosecution, but everything else would be used for giving complete transparency to the people and giving the General Assembly a roadmap for cutting services or streamlining services or implementing policies that make things more efficient. It could be used as a way to hold these agencies accountable, and the people would have complete transparency on it.
So, Mr. Attorney General, you did answer the very next question that I was going to ask you. But for our viewers, I would just kind of like to lay out some things and get your continued thoughts on the matter. So, South Carolina currently has the Office of the State Auditor, the Office of the Inspector General, which you discussed, the Legislative Audit Council, and the House Government Efficiency and Legislative Oversight Committee. Big, long name. 4 distinct entities aimed at government accountability. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about doging and we talk about DOGE, we've seen this at the federal level. That is a new sort of agency, sort of, right? Would you be in favor of creating a new agency being a DOGE, or would you leverage, like you talked about the Inspector General, the other 4 that already exist and beefing them up, or actually having the LAC's recommendations taken into account and acted on by the General Assembly?
Look, the last thing I want to do is create duplicative government resources and agencies, bloating government, growing government. I believe the pavers have already been laid. We already have oversight vehicles. We have both in the legislature and in the executive branch vehicles for providing accountability and transparency to the public, shining the sun lamp on the dark shadows of government at all levels. I don't know that we need to create a new agency. I'm not saying I would be against it. I'm saying you'd have to convince me that we need to create another agency. I would rather take the framework of what we already have, reform it, and then give it new statutory powers and authority, increase the scope of its review authority, make sure it's adequately funded. I think it would pay for itself. And so that is just one example of something that I would be in favor of. I'm not against creating a brand new DOGE, but I think we already have the bones for that. Let's put meat on it. Let me give you one example. My office was investigating a Medicaid fraud case not long ago. In fact, it was this summer. We uncovered $21 million in a Medicaid scam, a scheme that was a number of defendants were co-conspirators. This was bled over in the North Carolina. This is actually interesting. What they were doing is they were defrauding South Carolina's Medicaid system, which DHHS manages. What was interesting is that they would create fake LLCs we'll just say Michael's counseling services, Alan's counseling services, right? And then they would go meet with real healthcare providers that provide counseling to, say, children, Medicaid beneficiaries who happen to be minors. And they would say, we want you to come work for our company, Alan's counseling, I'm making up the name, Alan's counseling service. And they would say, yeah, here's my information. I'd be interested in being an independent contractor. Then they would have their identification numbers, their licensing numbers. Then what they would do is they had other co-conspirators who had the Medicaid beneficiary information from the children, and they would go bill on behalf of minor children. They would say little Johnny was disruptive in school and was hitting and biting people and screaming and ranting and raving, and he has behavioral health issues. So we provided these services, and they would build against Medicaid. The problem is the real little Johnny is nonverbal or in a wheelchair, right? And of course they're manipulating his real medical records and billing against Medicaid. This went on for almost 5 years to the tune of $21 million. Every time our investigators said, hey, there's a red flag here, the bad guys would go create new entities, new LLCs, and rinse and repeat. And that's how they evaded for so long. But we kept saying to the other agency administering this program, have y'all gone and looked at the LLC address, the company address, to see if there really is a brick and mortar building there offering these services? And the answer we got was, we don't have the bandwidth to do that. We just don't, that's just too much work. Well, our team went and pulled up Google Maps, zoomed down on the address for one of those agencies in the Rock Hill area. Do you know what the address was? It was the address for the regional office for the Department of Health and Human Services, DHHS. It was their own address. Like the people, and so that was an example of government actors implementing government policies with an outdated, what I believe to be an outdated system. We need to reform not just the policies and the technology we're using to catch this fraud, but make sure we weed out and root out people who aren't doing their jobs. $21 million could have been deterred had we been up to the task 4 or 5 years ago. We caught them. They've been indicted. I don't know that we'll ever get that money back, but we at least stopped it. But we could have prevented it from happening.
Yeah, I mean,
It's an interesting story, by the way.
yeah, I think that you've laid out pretty clearly how you would go about, fixing spending and doging that area. So how would you how would you approach cutting red tape when it comes to the regulatory area, right? We know that South Carolina's legislation, their laws on the books are quite long. It's a big book. So how would you go about kind of, eliminating outdated laws and that kind
There
of
are a
thing?
lot of laws in the books that I believe have sunset clauses in them that should have gone away a long time ago. And state government is a creature of habit. It just does things because that's the way it's always done. Also, when you're in the free market, you have market forces driving good and punishing bad decisions and rewarding good decisions. But in government, we don't have market forces that affect how government actors operate. We need to artificially create market forces within state government so that when government actors know that their decisions causing a bad outcome, a loss in revenue, or an unintended consequence of policy, that they feel the burn and the heat the way a private sector, the way a person who owns a small business would feel it, right? So that is what I would like to create, that environment. The other thing I'd like to do is go back and look through these regulations. And I know in the first term, President Trump says, for every one regulation, I want you to cut 2. If you're going to put a new regulation on the books, cut 2 somewhere else. We need to go back and look at the barriers to entry into the private sector. There are some people who have to have so many hundreds of hours. People who want to open up a business doing, a beauty salon have to have so many hours. And it's creating people who would otherwise be able to compete in the private sector, but they have to get 1,500 hours or whatever the number is. It's been years since I looked at it, but it's a barrier to entry. And again, I want to open up the market for competition, and I want predictability and fairness for all businesses, both large and small alike, so that when they're operating, it's like 2 football teams playing on a field. The refs, which are the government enforcers, they don't have friends and enemies to reward or punish. They just apply the rules in a predictable manner, not indiscriminately, not arbitrarily based on what jersey is on the field at the time. If they have a favorite team, that's not how government's supposed to work. We're supposed to make it so that the teams can play the game fairly and that no one can break the rules, putting others at a competitive disadvantage. Outside of that, the government needs to get out of the way. And that's what I would advocate for.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. No picking winners and losers, just balls and strikes. That's it. Michael?
So we're going to get into an area you know a lot about, which is legal and regulatory reform. And we're going to start off with, so last session was my first session in South Carolina politics, and I came into a doozy, tort reform. That was quite the quite the experience to start my career in this sector, and taught me a lot. So last session, the legislature passed a proposal on lawsuit reform related to liquor liability. What is your position on reforming South Carolina's joint and several liability law to move towards a pure and several liability system? Is that something that you're interested at all in pursuing? We did a poll in January. 63% of voters supported reforming joint and several liability. 1,200 registered voters in the state. What are your thoughts? And as we watch this tort reform battle, we got liquor liability done. There's still medical mal that's out there, the causal chain issue. There's truckers still looking for relief. The bars and restaurants, I think they're happy with what they got, but from what we've heard, there's an expectation that, hey, we're still not competitive.
Look, when it comes to tort reform in general, what I can say is last session, they were trying to hit a home run. They got a base hit. They got on base.
Right.
And, if you watch the movie Moneyball, getting on base over and over and over again incrementally can win games. So some of the things that they did, I'm very much in favor of. I think they made a huge, dealing with how liability is apportioned based on not just if you're a named defendant, but if you're one of the tortfeasors involved in the accident. That was a big issue. Right now, you had the system that was incentivizing only people with deep pockets. They were being incentivized to go only after the deep pockets, not the person who was the most responsible for causing the harm. On the liquor liability side, if you look at the law, everything below the 50% line, you could be only on the hook for the percentage of culpability if you were less than 50% liable, unless you were grossly negligent or you manufactured, sold, or distributed alcohol. If you were in the alcohol business, you were treated the same as someone who was grossly negligent. So a person buying a single drink at a bar at 5 p.m. and then drinking at 10 other bars and then killing someone at 2 a.m. If that bar was the deepest pocket, that was the one that they might be 2% liable, but they would have to pay 100% of the bill. I like the fact that we took that out. That was a great place to go. I tell folks all the time, you can say insurance companies are greedy, and that may be true in some cases, not in every case. I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but I know that liquor liability insurance for a restaurant in Georgia was basically about $5,000 a year. In South Carolina, it was roughly $25,000 a year, depending on the type of license you were getting. So are insurance companies only greedy in South Carolina, but not Georgia, right? So the laws that we pass, the policies that we pass under tort reform, they do drive certain behaviors in the private sector. And look, there are people out there. First off, I am for tort reform. I am for continuing to create more and more predictability. But there are also people out there who are being hurt, by bad business actors who are putting good business actors, in harm's way. And I don't think anybody is against holding them accountable in an appropriate way. But the laws that we pass, they need to pass my 5-way test. Every rule, policy, law, procedure that we pass as a government needs to pass a 5-way test. Is it responsible? Is it predictable? Is it accountable? Is it profitable? Is it stable? And let me say it again: responsible, predictable, accountable, profitable, stable. The first three is the law or policy or the person implementing it, or is it responsible? Is the law responsible, and is the person enforcing it acting responsibly? The number two, does it create more or less predictability in the market? The way our tort laws are written, I think, created less predictability. And also, who do you hold accountable? That's the third prong. The third prong is accountability. How do you hold someone accountable when, the law is being applied in a way that is wrong? Who do you go to? That's why I'm for judicial reform. We can talk about that in a minute if you want.
We're about to.
Yeah.
All right, I will reserve that portion, okay? But if you have a responsible government acting responsibly, spending responsibly, and then creating policies and laws that create more predictability, because if you're a small business owner and you're in a regulated industry, the less predictability there is because of the volume of regulations barreling down on you like an avalanche, you're going to have to hire lawyers and compliance officers to comply, and the cost of that gets borne by the consumer and the taxpayer. So more predictability lowers the cost of doing business, which gets passed on to the end user. So those three prongs are the most important in the sense that responsible, predictable, and accountable government produces the last two prongs. Government, it produces profitability and stability. Profitability, as I said earlier, the government's job is not to be profitable. The government doesn't have money. All it does is it takes money from one group and gives it to another group. It sets a tax rate, it sets a policy or a regulation, and people react to that in the private sector. It either creates more revenue or it drops revenue. But that's all the free market does, is react to the conditions placed on it by government actors. So profitability is a byproduct. It's not really, government isn't profitable, inherently profitable. It creates the conditions for profitability, and it's a byproduct of those first three. Stability goes to the why do we have government to begin with? Because we want the government actors to apply rules and laws in a way that is predictable, way that is efficient, way that is responsible, that you want, people want to live in a community free from crime. They want to be able to take their kids to school and have good schools teaching their kids, not indoctrinating their kids. They want schools that are going to produce good outcomes for them. They want to drive down roads and streets, and they want to drive on the interstates, not have to sit in traffic for 5 hours because of the bad traffic and because of the bad infrastructure. They don't want their transmission falling out because they're hitting potholes every 5 minutes. They don't want their bridges in their communities falling, right? They want to live, work, and raise their families free from crime with a solid infrastructure and a business climate that is beneficial to their bottom line. So that is the why we have government to begin with. Everything that I evaluate goes through that 5-way test, including tort reform, which is why I strongly support good, transparent laws that promote pro-business policies while allowing people who are harmed by bad actors in the economy, in the private sector, holding them adequately accountable.
Yeah, I think that the way that you describe that issue is very similar to judicial reform, right? You know, in 2024, we had, we weren't calling them reform, we were calling them enhancements, right? We had a bill passed that, you know, had some greater transparency requirements. We took some good steps on reforming the JMSC, but still not really fixing the root of the issue, which is the way that we select our judges in the state. I think the average person probably looks at it as there's 3 ways to do it, right? There's the way that we do it, where the legislature selects it, which only one other state in the country does, Virginia, correct? And then there's electing our judges, right, which several states do. And then there's the federal model, right, appointed by the governor, confirmed by the Senate. How would you approach this issue, and what sort of reform would you prefer out of those kind of 3?
I can just answer that and make this a very short answer, or I can give you a little historical context. Which would you like?
Let's go historical context.
Historical context.
Yeah.
You guys are policy nerds, right? So, all right, you're wonky nerds. So, about back in the mid 90s, we created the Judicial Merit Selection Committee system, right? That is, and by the way, that is in the state constitution. The state constitution requires that we have what's called a JMSC, Judicial Merit Selection Commission. Statutorily, that commission is set up by statute, right? It's not by, we have to have a JMSC unless we amend the Constitution. So I've been advocating for changing the way that we elect judges for years. And the reason is that if you get judges that are anti-business or anti-victim, and obviously there's a very high profile case going on right now with a young woman who was tragically murdered in Colombia and the system failed her, okay? This is drawing a lot of light on that. But if you have judges that are letting violent repeat offenders out in our communities, you can go to your local House member and your local senator and complain about it. But there's 170 other members, there's 168 other members of the 170 member General Assembly that you don't have any influence politically over, you know, as a voter. And so what you have is we have a system. This is how it used to be. Under state law, the JMSC was comprised of 10 people. 6 of those 10 people were appointed by 3 leaders in the General Assembly. The other 4 were non-legislators. So you had 6 legislators basically sitting on a 10-person committee, all of them appointed by the legislature, that controlled the vetting of judicial candidates, the nominating of those candidates, and then by law, they would spit out 3 people. If you had 10, they would spit out their 3 favorite or their 3 most qualified. And then the legislature would have an election on those 3. Basically, you had the legislature controlling the vetting, the nominating, the election, and ultimately controlling the budgets of the judicial branch of government. Now, we all graduated 3rd grade civics, right? And we know that there's 3 branches of government, and they're supposed to be able to have adequate checks on each other. There was no adequate check on the executive branch of government. What I've always believed is that, yes, the legislature is closer to the people than the governor because they are locally elected. But corporately speaking, you've got 170 people, and we had a system that consolidated power in one branch of government but disperse that power over 170 people. It is very difficult to hold 170 people accountable for bad government decisions. But the governor is one person that we all vote for and against. And like on the federal model, I have always advocated for the governor to have a bigger seat at the table so that if bad judges are making bad decisions and acting poorly from the bench, it is easier to go to one governor to exert influence on that governor for removing that judge, or at least influencing that judge to be scrutinized so they can be removed. The system that we had did not do that, right? The executive branch, the governor, and all of us, the attorney general, we were out with our faces pressed to the glass. What I advocated for was for the governor. I was told that we're not going to change the Constitution. So I said, fine, give the governor all of the appointments on the JMSC. And then we remove the cap of 3. I think if anyone's qualified, let them apply and let's weed them out. What the General Assembly ultimately did is they gave the governor 4 positions on the JMSC. They gave the House 4 positions. They gave the Senate 4 positions. The governor is still outvoted by the 8 positions from the legislature, but they at least have 4 positions on the JMSC. They expanded the 3-person cap, 3 candidates would be spit out, to 6. And they also now have it so that it can be streamed live on the General Assembly website. So you don't have to drive to Columbia if you're in Pickens or Horry or Beaufort. You can watch it from the comfort of your business or your couch. And that's good. But I think we can do better. So that was the historical context. I believe we got about 60% of what we wanted. No one else running for governor has spent more time on this issue than me. I've been advocating for this for 10 years, and I was able to work with the legislature to move the needle. What I would like to see done, I think in a perfect world, the federal model is the best way to go. The governor nominates, the legislature ups or down votes a person. But if that is not the best we can do, the governor should appoint all of the members on the JMSC. I would also like to see the governor appoint all the at-large judges, so that the judges moving around the state helping to move the backlog of cases would be accountable to the governor, who would be in turn accountable to the entire population of South Carolina. These are some of the things I would like to see done.
Thank you. Sam, do we want to get on to the incentive piece?
Sure. Which with this one?
Yeah, right there.
Sure,
So
yeah.
he answered that
So
question.
moving into kind of a different regulatory area over the past couple of years, with the rise of AI and more of these technological companies moving around the country, we've seen our state in particular try to target these data centers to come to our state, so then they can set up shop here, and this is a good way to bring in some tax revenue. However, they obviously require a exorbitant amount of energy, right? They require a lot of energy. They require a lot of water. In our most recent energy proposal that the state passed, we had some protections to protect ratepayers, from having to pay heightened rates because of these data centers. And that was taken out and then reinserted and then taken out. And then the final version is not in there. So what kind of steps would you take to protect the average South Carolinian from having to pay a higher energy bill because a data center maybe, moved next door?
Well, first off, when it comes to data centers, what I like to remind people is they're great, but you got to understand there's a drawback to them. They take up a big footprint. They draw a lot of power. They provide very few jobs, right? They require water to keep the servers cool, which is, obviously that has an environmental impact. It also could impact consumer utility rates. So I am going to always look at every law, every proposal through the rubric of that 5-way test. Is the rule or policy responsible, predictable, accountable, and does it produce profitable outcomes and stable outcomes for our society here in South Carolina? So I would obviously support any rules, any laws, or any personnel policies, whether it's on the PSC or any other regulatory body, that those people kept that in mind. Obviously, I believe whether these types of servers should be there as a private sector decision made in the free market, but the government needs to make sure it puts guardrails there that protect the consumer and the ratepayer at the end of the day. That is the number one priority for me, keeping utility rates low. But we do need to focus on infrastructure, not just roads and bridges, but also on energy. It's like if South Carolina is a house, we have 1950s appliances, but we're trying to move in all this new technology and we don't have the modern appliances plumbed into the house. We have to make our house, modern and more efficient, right? And so we have to upgrade our state, just like you'd upgrade a house to move in all the modern appliances and having the efficiency energy standards. You got to update our state, and we haven't been doing that to the level I think we should. As governor, I would be the infrastructure governor. We would definitely focus on making South Carolina a better state on energy issues, on energy infrastructure. Another thing I would want to do is, and this is on roads and bridges, the largest landowner in South Carolina is the state of South Carolina, but we are not monetizing that dirt. that grass that you see driving down the interstate, between the interstates, that's owned by the state of South Carolina. And so are the left and right sides of the interstate. Why are we not leasing that to fiber optic companies or energy companies that laying pipelines down? We could collect revenue from that. We could put privately managed and owned toll roads that would be paid for by a bond, and then we could charge people driving through our state who don't even live here for the right to drive on the toll roads, and it would also free up a lot of the traffic congestion. Why don't we have public-private partnerships and then let those fund our infrastructure projects? I can't tell you how many times I've driven in from Georgia into South Carolina. I see I-95 go from this to this, and then my car is shaking because of all the potholes. We can do a better job of driving funds there and allowing people in other states to pay for it.
Are there any specific changes? Right now, the speaker has an ad hoc committee regarding DOT. They've been meeting in the off session. Are there any specific SCDOT efficiencies that you would like to see in particular?
Yes. First off, I have a lot of ideas. We are still putting them together, and we're going to be rolling them out. And I'm happy to come back on this, this show another time. But yes, I mean, I think government, like making our government more accountable to the chief executive officer of government, which is the governor, is something I want to do. The governor is not a weak governor in a vacuum, but relative to the legislature and even the judiciary, the governor is weaker compared to other states. And I believe that the governor can be more than a mouthpiece, more than a cheerleader, more than a recruiter for industry and business. The governor can be situated in a place where if you give the governor the adequate power and authority to do things relative to I don't want the governor to be more powerful than the legislature. I think that's a bad idea, or the judiciary. I want more parity of power so there's more accountability in government. But put the governor in a place where the governor can get the state to the next level. And if the governor fails to do that, there's only one person you can blame, and that's the governor. And the legislature, that blame gets, everyone does this on every issue, whether it's education, infrastructure, energy, whatever.
So we're going to move on to our last major topic, and this is Sam's baby. It's education. So Sam, kick us off with some education.
Yeah, you alluded to this a little bit earlier. You know, we want our kids to be educated but not indoctrinated. So how do you view the role of a parent in their child's education, and what sort of steps would you take to protect that role?
Parents' involvement in their children's upbringing and education and raising is supreme. And nothing should come between the parent and the child. We have people out there in the education system who believe that they're entitled to educate our children independent of how the parents and the communities want. So first, I'm always going to stand on the side of parents. Number two, South Carolina, if you look at by the third grade testing is a great predictor of where a child will be in 10, 15, 20 years. So by third grade testing standards, and there are exceptions, I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but with exception, by the third grade, you can tell if a child's going to end up in prison system or on entitlement programs, or if that child is going to be a productive member of society, which is why I'm a big proponent of universal school choice. I'm a big proponent, let the dollars follow the child. I'm also a big proponent of investing in earlier childhood education like 3K, 4K, kids, especially kids in rural areas and who have either one parent or very rarely have any parents in the home. They're not reading or being read to. They're not hearing as many words as parents in more urban areas with professional parents. And so these kids start off behind. Investing in these children when they're 3, 4, 5 years old is something that we have to do with reading, phonics, early math comprehension. We have to invest earlier. There's an old adage, so the twig bends, the mighty oak grows. So think of that child as a twig. It is easier to bend a twig back this way with those earlier investments. But if you don't do that when they're 3, 4, and 5, you're going to be paying for them when they're 30, 40, and 50 because they're either going to be on welfare or they're going to be in prison somewhere, right? And they're going to be a drag on our economy, a drag on society. The other thing I want to do is, if you look at other states like our neighbor to the north, North Carolina, for high school kids who want to do dual enrollment programs, South Carolina has a statutory dual enrollment program, but compared to North Carolina's, ours is a dirt road, theirs is a 4-lane superhighway. And so what I mean by that is it's not uniform, it's not universal in every school district. Dual enrollment allowed kids while in high school to knock out up to 2 years of general education requirements for a technical college or for a 4-year college if they need one. And not every kid needs a 4-year degree, and they don't need 4 years of debt. But we can make families living in the margins have more accessibility to those educational opportunities if those children with the opportunity, the inclination, and the aptitude to take dual enrollment courses. That saves so much money for families, for kids who are first generation colleges or who are going to technical schools. It gives them so much more opportunity. Bake in technical college courses into high schools. Not every kid needs the same level of general education requirements for college preparatory classes. They might need to be focusing on coding. They might be on being a machinist, being a truck driver, being a paralegal, being a whatever, a red tech, a med tech, or a rad tech. Um, this is the future. We are turning away 4,000 to 5,000 applicants at technical colleges every year. I don't know if you knew that. But when I was told that by technical college presidents, I asked, why is that? They said, Alan, I can put 35 kids in an English class. I can't put 35 kids in a welding class. Half of them come out missing a finger. We need to expand those opportunities for kids. When they graduate high school, they don't need to go for 2 years of an associate's degree or 9 months of a technical training. They're already ready to go into a job making $90,000 a year, say in Williamsburg County. I mean, that opens up so many opportunities for them, and it changes the trajectory of their life. These are just some of the ideas I have on education.
And I've just learned this as well, this point I'm about to bring up. It's more technical, tactical. Graduation rates in the state are on the rise, which is objectively good, but ACT and SAT scores are going down, which is really interesting, right? You would figure they'd run in parity. Grading floors have been sort of the root cause of this, or it's been alleged the root cause of this. You have students who are getting a standard score, even though they performed less than that score would otherwise indicate. There's a bill right now, Senator Zell out of Sumter, it's S537, to prohibit school districts from requiring teachers to assign a minimum grade or score that exceeds the student's actual performance. So basically, and Mississippi, Sam and I were just talking about this earlier, has gone from 48th to 18th in the nation in education. And they held back third graders, to your point, on that specific age, who couldn't meet the reading and mathematical skills at that level. So they held them all back, introduced phonics, went hyper, on math and quant side, and they have seen not only their graduation rates rising, but their test scores as well. So getting back to the grading floor piece, is that something you would be interested in saying, hey, a student performs how they perform?
If you go to the doctor and get a health makeup, and the doctor uncovers something that might be cancerous,
Right.
but the doctor wants to have a good rate for his office, that we're not going to report people with cancer or some malady, right? That we're going to go ahead. I mean, you wouldn't do that in the medical field, where you paint over or gloss over something that is toxic or something that is potentially very unhealthy for the body, the human that you're talking to. Why do we do that in education with children? Like if a child is failing and they're getting a 10 or a 0 in a course, why would you artificially inflate them to 50? You're not doing that child any good at all. You're still passing a failing child you're going to put into the world. And you think the world is going to give them a minimum grade? No, the world is going to chew them up and spit them out. That is wrong. It is bad. And we shouldn't do that to our children just to have an artificially inflated, test scores in South Carolina. So absolutely, I would support that.
Yeah, I agree with you too. We have to have students' scores reflect their performance. This is our last question here. You alluded to this earlier about school choice, that you support school choice. What steps would you take to expand existing programs and create new ones?
Oh, well, look, I think what we've done right now is the way to go. I've talked to Ellen Weaver about this, and we have created a roadmap. We have created papers for expanding, access to the dollars. I defended the ESA all the way to the Supreme Court. I know that we've tweaked it when it was struck down. We have tweaked it, and now it is back in place. So that is something I would continue to build on. Sometimes getting on base, getting on first base is the way you get to home. You don't always hit a home run. So basically continuing to build on the laws that we already have, expanding opportunities, getting dollars to children, is something that follow the child. It should be about what is in the best interest of the child, not what is in best interest of the educator. We need to take care of our educators, and I believe in merit-based pay raises for teachers. I believe teachers who go to underperforming school districts and take on, it's different being in a very rural, poor area and being in a wealthy, and urban area. The teacher is their job is not going to be as difficult as the other teacher. So I want to incentivize good teachers to go to those areas and take on the tough task. But I believe that you incrementally build on what you've done, and that is how you do it. You don't always hit a home run, but if I get from first base to second to third, I'll eventually get to home.
Sure. Attorney General Wilson, thank you for your time. I'm going to give you the floor. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you want to opine on before we end this interview.
Look, my campaign for governor is not just about telling you or people at home who are watching me about what I'm going to do. It is about telling you my vision for the state and what I would like to do. But it's as much about learning from think tanks like this, from groups, from parents, from people out there operating in the free market, having to live under the regulatory and legal regime that we place on them as government actors, and learning what they want their governor to do for them. And so that's what I am. I tell people all the time, if you're looking for a governor who will be 100% right all of the time, that you will always agree with, and who will never make mistakes, I'm not your guy. Don't vote for me. Don't support me if you want perfection. I'm not running to be your pastor. I'm not running to be your savior. I'm running to be a vehicle for good policies and good reforms to state government. If you want a governor who will be accountable to you and accessible to you, then I ask people, give me the opportunity to earn your vote, because I will be accountable. I will be accessible. And I'm always open to recognizing that maybe my idea isn't the best idea. Maybe there's a better idea that someone else has, and I need to be willing to pivot and vector differently in a different direction. And I'm open to that. But right now, as a candidate for governor, I believe I have a roadmap for success in South Carolina as a 29-year veteran, as a person who's led soldiers in combat, who's made life and death decisions, who's made tens of thousands of decisions in South Carolina as Attorney General. I believe I'm more uniquely qualified to be governor than anyone else. And I would humbly ask for the support of people watching this video right now. And I look forward to traveling the state and meeting you in person.
Attorney General Alan Wilson, thank you so much for being here. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.